Hi, everybody, and welcome to another Mercy One Low Carb Living Keto Connect. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Steve Riggs. I'm a board certified internal medicine physician and pediatrician, and also an advanced ketogenic nutrition specialist. And I wanted to talk to you tonight about COVID-19 and keto basics. And obviously, we're in the middle of a worldwide pandemic, and nothing we've seen has been like this until you go back to about 100 years to the Spanish flu. And we've all been through that. Just to give you some perspective, in the Spanish flu, it infected 500 million people, which was about a third of the world's population at that time, killed at least 50 million people worldwide. COVID-19 has infected many people as well. We're approaching 50,000 deaths here in the United States at this time. So it's clearly been a huge problem, just unprecedented. And in my medical lifetime, I've not seen anything like it. And it might seem a little frivolous or even maybe kind of irresponsible to maybe be talking about keto in these times, when so many people are suffering from COVID-19. And what I want to get across tonight is basically actually not that really there's no better time for probably looking at the ketogenic diet and getting into metabolic shape than during this COVID-19 pandemic. And, the reason for that is, there's a lot we can do to reduce our risk for complications from COVID. For example, why do some people get sicker than others? As you know, a lot of people find that they present very differently with COVID-19. Many people are asymptomatic. Other people get very sick with flu-like symptoms. Other people need to be hospitalized. Some people end up on a ventilator. And of course, many people actually die from this infection. And why is that? Well, when it first came out in China, several risk factors were identified as age, especially chronic lung disease, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and hypertension for sure. And as it rolled its way around the world, especially as it got to Europe and now North America and here in the United States, one risk factor has really risen to the top, and that is obesity. In fact, obesity eclipses even chronic lung disease in terms of your risk factors for COVID-19 complications. The bottom line is that it's the metabolically sick who are at highest risk of those complications. And to reduce your risk, not only wear proper PPE and social distancing, but get into metabolic shape. And really the main point I want to make tonight is that you can get in metabolic shape relatively quickly within weeks. And that's where the ketogenic diet comes in. Well, what is it about obesity and the COVID complications that is causing problems? I mean, we've known for a long time that obese patients have higher rates of complications for all sorts of conditions, including influenza, which kills about 40,000 Americans every year, and also other coronavirus epidemics, the MERS-CoV-2, which was not a worldwide pandemic, but it was an epidemic, which was quite significant. Obese patients fared poorly with that one as well. In New York City, which has been the epicenter of the COVID-19 epidemic here in the United States, obesity was quickly found to be a greater risk factor than high blood pressure, diabetes, coronary disease, cancer, kidney disease, or even lung disease. And for patients under 60, those with obesity were twice as likely to be hospitalized and were at even higher risk of requiring critical care. Back in China, a study of COVID-19 patients showed that those with a high body mass index had more than double the risk of severe pneumonia than those with a lower BMI. And in another study of 112 COVID-19 patients, of the 17 who died, 15 were either overweight or clinically obese. A French study showed that nearly half of 124 COVID-19 patients had obesity, and that the need for mechanical ventilation increased more with the higher BMI. Here in the United States, down in Louisiana and southern Mississippi, 60% of patients hospitalized with COVID-19 had obesity, and obesity appeared to nearly double their risk of requiring a ventilator. So here you can look at the graph of the world, and the size of those circles represents the number of patients who have been infected with COVID-19. The larger the circle, the more people infected in that given country. And you can see the United States is leading the way by far. And it's almost as if the obesity epidemic is meeting the COVID pandemic. Because here in the United States, we're also the most obese nation on the planet with an obesity rate now of 42%. And even more disturbing, a statistic you don't hear as much about is that the CDC estimates that only about 12% of us are metabolically healthy. And I think that is really the major underlying problem here. Because what is it about obesity that creates more risk? I mean, why does being fat increase your problems and risk for COVID-19 complications? Well, we know that people with obesity have increased inflammation, they have depressed immune function, they're more prone to the cytokine storm, which we see in the sickest patients with COVID-19. The cytokine storm is where cytokines are cell mediated chemical messengers that turn on a lot of inflammatory processes. And what we're seeing in patients who really start to go downhill with COVID-19 is all of a sudden their body recognizes this infection and they bring out all the big guns of inflammation to try to rid themselves of the infection. And in doing so, it causes a lot of friendly fire or damage to their normal tissues in what's called a cytokine storm. And obese people are more prone to have that. It's not only that, but they're physically harder to take care of, ventilate, intubate, et cetera. And they're more likely to have other comorbid illnesses like diabetes and hypertension and cardiovascular disease and other things. And I'm speculating here, but I think one of the biggest problems is increased insulin resistance. I say that because insulin resistance, we know, is the driver for obesity, as it is the driver for cardiovascular disease and diabetes, and really the entire spectrum of chronic diseases that 88% of us will die from. So insulin resistance is the big factor. And I really wonder, even of those patients who are not obese, who are developing severe complications from COVID-19, it makes you wonder what their insulin resistance is, because not all patients with obesity have severe insulin resistance, 90% do, but not all patients who are not obese don't have insulin resistance. Many people still do. And so I think there's going to be a lot of research looking into this over the coming months and weeks ahead, and stay tuned, we'll see. But this is my I guess, prognostication is that insulin resistance is going to be the major issue. Well, what is it to be in metabolic health anyway? The CDC defines it this way. They're basically looking at waist circumference, which gives us an idea of what your visceral fat level is. Visceral fat is that fat around the internal organs, which is a major driver, by the way, of insulin resistance. And waist circumference can kind of reflect that. They want to make sure you have no evidence for diabetes or glycemic control is good, that your blood pressure is normal, and that your lipids are good. So specifically, very quickly, waist circumference less than 40 inches for men, less than 35 inches for women. And in the red markings, I put in my own little caveats here, and I put a waist to height ratio of 0.5 to 0.6. That is the ratio between your waist circumference and your height. That ratio, basically your waist should be about half of your height. And if so, that's ideal. For every degree at which it goes up, you can lose years of life. In fact, to those of you who took the low-carb boot camp, you remember that graph that showed that we could predict how many years of life have been lost based on your weight to height ratio increasing. Secondly, we want to have no evidence for diabetes or pre-diabetes. So normal fasting glucose, hemoglobin A1C less than 5.7. We want to make sure you have normal blood pressure, number 3. So under 120 over 80 would be ideal. And then we're looking at your lipids. We'd like to see your triglycerides less than 150, HDL cholesterol greater than 40 for men, greater than 50 for women. And again, I put in my little caveat here, a triglyceride over HDL ratio of at least less than 2. Notice here, interestingly, that total cholesterol and LDL don't even factor in terms of metabolic health. It really has to do more with triglycerides and HDL reflecting that. So that's what it is. And the main thing I want to get across here is this can be achieved relatively quickly. So metabolic health can get along pretty fast within usually weeks. You don't have to lose 100 pounds in order to be metabolically healthy. And we primarily do this just by changing your diet. So just to give you an example, in the last low carb boot camp that we had 13 patients who were diabetic. All but 4 of them achieved hemoglobin A1Cs less than 6.5. So they did not have diabetes anymore. All of them were taken off medications for diabetes, except for possibly metformin, including insulin. In fact, one person had 40 units of Lantus a day. The other person had 100 units of Lantus a day. And they both came off that amount of insulin within just weeks. So that just gives you an idea of how quickly you can achieve metabolic health. And that's the main point I want to get across tonight. So let's switch gears here and talk about how that's achieved and what the ketogenic diet is and kind of how we do it. So this is an introductory talk. And for those of you who've taken the low carb boot camp, this will be probably a little review for you. For those of you which this is new, this will give you a brief introduction. So why do people get fat? Well, the science is stacking up, and it's more than just calories in, calories out. I mean, that's what I preached for 30 years. That basically, if you eat this much and you burn this much, the excess is going to go to fat, so you need to just eat less and move more. And it just doesn't work. I mean, you can willpower it down for a while, but you're basically just going to yo-yo right back up to where you were before. And that happens over and over again. And the reason for that is it's just much more complex than calories in, calories out. I mean, sure, you should eat less and move more. We all should. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but it's more complicated than that. And because it depends on what you eat. I mean, right? So the way your body treats 100 calories of broccoli is very different from 100 calories of sugar. And like all growth, obesity is hormonally mediated. There are many hormones involved, but the primary one is insulin. So insulin is the major hormone driving growth of all kinds, and especially obesity. Well, what does insulin do? Well, insulin is secreted by your pancreas in response to what you eat. So if you eat carbohydrates, it goes up a lot. If you eat protein, it goes up a little bit. And if you eat fat, you can see here it doesn't go up hardly at all. And what does insulin do with that? Well, it does a lot of things, but 2 primary functions. It drives those carbohydrates into your cells to produce fat. And even more importantly, it blocks your fat from being utilized as a fuel source. So that's what insulin does. So if we eat carbohydrates all the time, which we do, then your insulin levels are always up, and we're always producing fat, and we're blocking fat from being utilized as a fuel source. You're basically like a hybrid engine. You can burn fat for fuel, or you can burn sugar for fuel. And in today's climate, we're eating 50 to 60% of our diet as carbohydrates, which is unprecedented. Human beings have never eaten that many carbohydrates. But because of that, our insulin levels are always up, always up, always up. We're always storing fat. We're blocking fat from being utilized as a fuel source. And because of that, we have the obesity and diabetes epidemic. This started because we changed our food. Back in the late 70s, we declared fat bad. Fat makes you fat, fat gives you heart disease, and everybody's known since then that a low-fat diet is a healthy diet, right? Well, not so fast. It was controversial then. It's definitely controversial today. But because we took fat out of our diet, we had to put something in because food tastes like cardboard. So we put sugar into that food primarily and created processed food, high fructose corn syrup and all the ingredients that go into that. And because of that, our low-fat diet became a high carbohydrate diet. Because of that, our insulin levels have gone up and the obesity epidemic was born. Obesity went from 12% back in the late 70s to now 42% of Americans are clinically obese. Diabetes has gone up 900% in that same time interval. And the reason we took fat out of our food was to hopefully prevent cardiovascular disease, which of course it didn't do. Cardiovascular disease is still our #1 killer. So this is how it comes about. It really isn't so much about sloth and gluttony. People who are overweight, it's not that they're not moving enough or eating too much. It's that their diet, which is generally high in carbohydrates, causes high insulin levels. that drives those carbohydrates into their cells, producing fat and ultimately obesity. High insulin levels over time lead to insulin resistance, diabetes, and the entire metabolic syndrome, which is another talk. So everyone wants to become a fat burner, right? You're a sugar burner, we want to become a fat burner. Well, there's only one on switch for fat burning, and this is the key principle behind the ketogenic diet. And that is you've got to lower your insulin levels. I don't care what kind of diet you're on, whether it's low calorie, low fat, or low carb, or whatever. If you're burning fat, you have lowered your insulin levels. But because carbohydrates drive insulin up the most efficient way of lowering your insulin levels while still fueling your body is to go on a very strict low carbohydrate diet, which is what the ketogenic diet is. So why is it called keto? Well, almost all your cells can run on fat just fine except the brain. The brain is kind of the spoiled child of your body's organs. It's composed of mostly fat, and so it doesn't burn fat for fuel. It runs on glucose or something called ketones. Ketones are produced by your liver from fat that you're mobilizing. So as your insulin levels drop, you start burning fat. Fat is being released into your bloodstream, goes to your liver. Your liver converts some of that fat not only to glucose, but into ketones, which very efficiently and cleanly provide fuel for your brain, heart, muscle, and gut. But more than that, ketones are also signaling molecules. They're not just fuel. They actually turn on about 100 different physiologic processes in your body that turn out to be highly beneficial. And that's where it really gets interesting for me. This is a graph just showing the number of studies that are being published on the ketogenic diet. And you can see over the past 10 to 15 years, that has just increased logarithmically because we're seeing all sorts of beneficial effects of ketones. This is a graph just showing you where evidence is very strong. The ketogenic diet was invented at Mayo Clinic about 100 years ago in 1921 as a fasting mimicking diet, primarily to treat epilepsy. We've known for about 2,000 years that people with epilepsy, their seizures drastically go down when they fast. You can't fast all the time, but so they hypothesized that if we created a fasting mimicking diet that caused insulin levels to drop and ketone levels to rise, that it would help their epilepsy. And in fact, it does. It reduces seizure frequency by about 50% in people with recalcitrant seizures. It also is effective for a host of other medical issues like acid reflux disease or polycystic ovary syndrome. I've had 3 couples who have come to me with PCOS, which is caused by hyperinsulinemia. Going on the ketogenic diet, they've all the women have achieved menstrual cycles, and one couple is actually pregnant right now, which is pretty exciting. Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is epidemic in our country right now. It's becoming the leading cause for liver transplantation and cirrhosis. It is actually not caused by fat you eat. It's caused by excessive carbohydrates, which are turned into fat in the liver. And the best way of reducing or reversing that problem is through a ketogenic diet. It also improves other gut issues like irritable bowel syndrome, inflammatory bowel disease, and others. It's especially effective in neurologic disorders like Alzheimer's dementia, for which it's being studied. Alzheimer's is called type 3 diabetes because it's basically insulin resistance in the brain, which can also be helped with the ketogenic diet, as can a host of other neurologic problems like Parkinson's disease, MS, LS, and others. Traumatic brain injury, for example, is another very known condition which is benefited by the ketogenic diet. Another evolving area is in cancer. There's over 30 clinical trials going on right now on the ketogenic diet in cancer treatment, which is very exciting. Cancer turns out to require a lot of glucose and a lot of insulin. Well, if you can put people on a ketogenic diet and drop both of those factors, you can hit the Achilles heel of cancer. And stay tuned, there's a lot of evolving evidence coming out about the benefits of keto in cancer treatment. Well, how do we do it? How do we get on the ketogenic diet? I kind of do this in a stepwise process, but the first step is simply just to stop snacking. We can easily do that and hopefully go just 3 meals a day. Secondly, cut out all obvious sugar. That'd be soda pop, your cookies and cakes and pies and juices and things like that, and eat real food. And you shouldn't have to look at a label to know whether a food is real, right? You can just look at it. You know that's meat. You know that's fish. You know that's a vegetable, okay? That's really what we want you to eat. Then we can reduce our carbohydrates further by using the acronym NO GPS. So G stands for grains. That would be corn, wheat, or rice. So that rules out a lot of your breads and cereals. P stands for pasta and potatoes, American staples, but just chains of starch. And S is sugar, and especially sugar. Sugar itself is pretty toxic, actually. It's a processed food itself, and it's found in about all processed food in general. There's 61 different synonyms for sugar on the processed food label, and you want to try to get rid of that as much as possible. Fourthly, take breaks from eating. Go longer between meals. We talk about intermittent fasting and time-restricted eating. Usually I introduce that after about a month. So after you've been on the ketogenic diet, it takes a few weeks to shift your physiology over from becoming a carb burner to a fat burner. That's a very significant physiologic shift. And in fact, you'll become increasingly more efficient at burning fat as the weeks and months go by. Even 6, 9, 12 months out, you're increasing your efficiency for fat burning. But within the first few weeks, once you become a fat burner, it becomes easier to go longer between meals because your cells are always being fueled, whether you're eating or not. So even if you're not eating, you're burning your own fat, and so your cells are getting fueled and they're happy. So it's much easier to do fasting, which we start in on later in the program, usually after about 3 to 4 weeks. Finally, the good news is that you get to eat fat. So as I mentioned, we went on the low-fat diet because we thought fat was evil, that fat made you fat and fat gives you heart disease. But the science is stacking up that actually it really doesn't. We probably, in fact, went from the kettle into the fire because it's carbohydrates, especially simple carbohydrates, which drive a lot of that problem. So you get to eat fat, and those foods tend to be nutriently dense and delicious. So that's the good news about the ketogenic diet. I think a lot of my colleagues think keto isn't sustainable because they think you're like this woman chugging MCT oil all day or something, and that's not it, okay? This is not what keto is, and neither is this. Keto is not just an excuse for you to overeat all things fat and horrible. Keto actually looks more like this. So it could be a Caesar salad with a ranch fatty dressing like that. Or it could look like this pasta, which is delicious. Those noodles are made not with pasta, but did I say pasta? Not lasagna. This is lasagna, not made with pasta, but with noodles made from cheese, actually. Or this is a BLT with air bread, which is delicious. And these high protein pancakes with heavy cream and some blueberries, or good old bacon and eggs, and coffee. Definitely coffee is on the menu for keto, as are tea, other drinks like water and stuff are also favorites. In fact, this is what keto looks like. It's not rocket science. We're just trying to get people to eat real food, meat, fish, vegetables that are above ground. If it's green and leafy, you can eat it. Whole fat, dairy, nuts and seeds. These are the kind of things we want you to eat. It's just real food. Well, I give this talk a lot in my office to patients, and I'd say about 20% of people will run with that. They'll take my handout, they'll look up the references, they'll get on the ketogenic diet, and when they come back in about a month, I'll tell you, I can tell the people who have done it, they've lost a significant amount of weight, usually 10 pounds, 15 pounds even isn't uncommon. They feel great. Mental clarity, increased energy is almost universal. They're not hungry. Because they're eating fat, and fat is satiating, they're really not hungry. Many of them have automatically gone to what we call time-restricted eating, where they're only eating twice a day and they're not snacking. And so this is typical as you become a fat burner. But about 80% of the people don't do it. And I think the reason being is there's just too many how barriers and why barriers to doing this diet. You have to be intentional about what you eat. You have to shop differently. this food will spoil, so you might have to go to the store even more often, and so forth. And because of this, we've set up various systems of support. So at the risk of sounding like an infomercial here, I don't mean to do that. I just want to show you that, there's a lot of different things we are offering to help people get into this lifestyle. And make no mistake, that's what the ketogenic diet is. It is a lifestyle. You can't go back. I mean, if you do this for 6 months and lose some weight, if you go back to the way you're eating, it all comes roaring right back. The obesity, the diabetes, whatever. So what you see is what you get. So if you want a different you have to switch your eating pattern. Now that requires help for most people. Health coaches are great. Janice is one of those. Mary Margaret Halverson, Carol Luce are our other two health coaches. They know better than I do how to do the ketogenic diet, where to find local foods and resources, online help, recipes, motivation. How do you work with stress? How do you work with vacations or eating out, and so forth? They can help you overcome those barriers, and they're a great resource. Our nutritionists here at Mercy One are also really, really well trained. Mary Steffensmeyer is also an advanced ketogenic nutrition specialist, as I am, and she's very willing and able to help you with nutritional special needs you might have. I run a metabolic clinic where I can do some specialized testing, individualize this for people with special medical problems. We have a low-carb community, either online through the Facebook group, which is Living by Design Low Carb Support. We have an emailing list. If you're not on that, I'd recommend you get on that, because we notify people about upcoming events that way. And then, of course, these kind of Keto Connects with Zoom meetings and Facebook Live presentations. We've got a lot of online resources. And our flagship program is the 8-week Low Carb Boot Camp, which is a pretty intense 8-week course where we check your labs before and after. We give you a SMART scale, a ketone analyzer. You have health coaching. I give a talk, something like this, every week, and we help you work out problems and issues and barriers you have to the ketogenic lifestyle. What I have found that crafted the Low Carb Boot Camp is that 95% of people will stay with it after that. They have all the tools necessary to do it. So that's why we promote that. So here's just a kind of a quick overview, a link of how you can access these things. You can call me for the IDMC clinic, which is Intensive Dietary Metabolic Clinic consultation. I don't need a referral from your doctor, but I'd be glad to take referrals. I will definitely communicate all my results and such to your physician. You can get on board and register for the Low Carb Boot Camp, or talk to your health coaches, and so forth. So all of this is available to help you make this lifestyle change. So that's a little bit about why I think the ketogenic diet is so important in this time of the COVID pandemic. You actually can achieve metabolic health, and you can do that relatively quickly, primarily just by changing your diet and the way you eat. Let us help you make that transition. If you do need any help or need any further information or have questions, please let us know. Thanks a lot for listening, and we'll talk to you guys later.